Welcome to the third webinar of our AFS Global Competence webinars for International Education Week. We're very happy you could join us from around the world. My name is Sarah Collins, and I work at AFS Intercultural Programs, and you are attending the missing piece, supporting host families of study abroad participants. So we're very happy to have you here during this webinar. Just a little housekeeping. There you'll see in this picture that there is a box at the top of your screen, the Zoom box that has some audio settings, so hopefully you can hear okay. There's also a Q&A box for questions and answers. So we will have two different parts of the webinar where we will pause and allow you to ask some questions. And there's also a chat box which we will open at one point in the webinar toward the end. So if you have any questions, whether it's related to content or related to logistics, your Zoom connection, etc., you can ask those in the Q&A box. And now just a little about AFS. So AFS is an international educational organization that promotes intercultural learning opportunities to help develop global citizens around the world. And we do this through multiple programs. We have study abroad or exchange programs. We also have volunteer programs. We have intercultural training programs, and we have host family programs. So it's this slide kind of gives you an overview of what AFS is. We are in 60 different countries. We have national organizations or offices in 60 countries. We have program activity in 94 countries. And of particular interest to this webinar, we have around 8,500 families that we work with around the world. So that is just an overview about AFS. We want to welcome our panelists. Today we have Marcela Laportosa joining us from Brisbane, Australia. She is the Director of Education and Intercultural Learning at AFS Intercultural Programs. And we also have Carla Ray Vasquez from AFS New Zealand. So she's joining us from New Zealand. She's the Organizational Development and Intercultural Learning Manager at AFS New Zealand. So welcome to both of you. You will see them when they speak. So I'm going to be here and help on the back end with logistics. So you will see me pop up from time to time. But welcome, and I'll turn it over to the panelists.
It's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you all. We're very excited about this topic that both Marcela and I are very passionate about. So we'll just tell you a little bit about how this morning is going to work out so you can have a bit of an idea. So the way we've decided to run the webinar is to divide it between a theoretical perspective that gives you a little bit of a foundation that then Marcela is going to build on and give you a more practical side to things. So don't panic if you're somebody who loves practice. There's a lot of it in it, but if you also love theory, there will be something good for you. So what I'm going to do is run you through the research that's available on host families, and then what recommendations we have from that research to support intercultural learning for host families. So there's a lot of ways to support families, but we will really focus on intercultural learning. I will then break for a Q&A, so you can ask us what you need to know, and then hand over to Marcela, who's going to put this into action and show you how you can implement this through a model that we use at AFS called the Host Family Intercultural Learning Journey. As part of this, she will show you some of the activities that we use that you will be able to take home with you to your own organization and to practice with your students or whoever you work with. And it will be very interactive, so be ready for our polls, for our questions, and to get to know each other. And then at the end, we will have another Q&A. So plenty of opportunity for you to ask things. But now we'll flip things to you, and we have a few questions that we want to know from you. So the first one is, where are you from? Where are you joining this webinar from? I can tell you that we have a lot of you from North America. That's really exciting. A few of you from Europe who've stayed very late for this. Thank you. Some from Central and South America. And there's a few of us from New Zealand. So that's really exciting to see.
So here is the next question. So how are you connected to the topic that we are discussing today? Are you an international coordinator, a student, a teacher, educator? Are you a host family coordinator? Maybe a volunteer, AFS volunteer or staff, a higher education professional, or maybe you are a host parent yourself, or any other thing that we haven't considered.
Right, so lots of our AFS colleagues and volunteers, thank you guys for their support. We have a few host family coordinators and teachers or educators. There's a few international student coordinators, which we know is a role that is growing, so good to have you guys here. A few host parents themselves, so it'll be really good to hear your opinions. And a few students, so yeah, broad range of engagement. Very good. Okay, for our last poll, and this will engage directly with our topic, we want to know what you think is the main obstacle to engage host families in intercultural learning. Okay, what are the main challenges that you have in terms of engaging a host family? And this doesn't matter whether you're a student or a family or you're an international dean, what challenges do you see? And you can choose multiple of these, and we will be engaging with these ones in our talk. Right, so interesting. A lot of you are saying that families probably don't have the time to engage with it. Yes, I would agree with that. Or that the other hand, you know, the organization or program provider doesn't have the time to work on that. It could be that they're not interested. Yeah, interesting responses. Very cool. All right, so with that, we will get started and tell you a bit of what's out there for you. So it's very interesting. We know a lot about students, right? We do a lot of research on students, and we know how they get to adapt, or what impact the length of a program has on them, or how they adapt to intercultural learning. But we have very little research about host families. And the research that we do have, funnily enough, is surrounding the topic of how do they make the students' experience successful, or what changes it creates in the dynamics of the family. But we don't really know much about intercultural learning and the development of intercultural learning within families, which is really interesting, I find, because that's one of the number one reasons that people give for wanting to host their students. So we can have it as a key reason, but we don't know whether we are developing it. Okay, the research also is quite anecdotal. So it's qualitative. Is based on, you know, what the experience looked like for a few families, and it's really big on this on emotions, you know, on this idea that it's a strong connection that is built, that lifelong relationships are made. You know, people often talking about how they went to see their host family 20 years after and visited their wedding, and this sort of scenario. Okay, so the key message that we want you to get out of this is that host families are the missing piece. Okay, not only are they the missing piece because they're not really present in the research and we should know more about them, but they're the missing piece because we're not really thinking of them in organizations. Okay, when we do engage them, we often think about logistics, or how you can take that student to the airport, or how you can help the student fill in a form, rather than really giving them the place they have in terms of upskilling them or the learning that they do, right? So this is our challenge to you. How are you going to engage families from now on so that you're fulfilling that opportunity, right? So what does the research that is available say? Okay, it talks about this emotional bond, this emotional experience. It says that when people talk about hosting, they either talk about it in terms of positive emotions that they got. Yes, their student became part of their family. They felt really proud of them. They felt really connected to them. Or negative emotions, you know, perhaps they angered the family, or perhaps they, you know, brought shame on the family. But nobody really talks about the knowledge or skills that are developed through the experience. And it talks about a successful experience as when strong bonds are built, you know, when that lifelong relationship is built. We know that it creates a deeper cultural immersion for the students. So beyond just perhaps going to a new country and going to school or learning, they also are fully immersed in this environment where they have to come across cross-cultural misunderstandings and cross-cultural differences. As a result, we know that, for example, there's an increase in language learning when the person is visiting a country different from the language they speak, and that they're also better supported because the host family has access to a third party. If the student needs attention or if they need help with anything, they can also be there to help them. It might be interesting for you to know that studies in New Zealand are also saying that students who are placed in homestays or host families versus students who are placed in boarding schools or find their own accommodation tend to describe their experience as more successful than their counterparts. So it's key. Host families are key. We know that staying with a host family can help disrupt cultural narratives and generalizations or stereotypes because the students are straight away confronted with the ideas or prejudices or assumptions that they had about a culture being challenged. So if they thought that all New Zealanders did things a certain way and the family doesn't do that, then that stereotype or that idea is immediately challenged. And that the student quickly learns the mechanisms of code shifting, so their ability to change how they act in different cultural contexts, which is, as for those of you who know a lot about intercultural learning, one of the key stages for learning and for being culturally effective. What we also know in terms of this is that a key factor is the quality and frequency of interactions that we have with host families. So it's not about how long a program is that will develop more or less intercultural learning. And it's also not about whether a student is placed in a host family versus a boarding school that would determine more or less intercultural learning, but it's the quality and frequency of the interactions that they have with a family that is going to determine whether those students develop more of that learning. And interestingly, you know, if you think about it, if a successful experience is about building a bond, where it's very hard to build a bond if you don't have quality and frequent interactions, right? That makes sense. The other point that I wanted to make is that this is also has an impact on the student that might not be visible until very many years later. And that's quite a challenge for us as providers, because how can we assess our success, or how can we assess an impact if it won't happen even many years after that student has returned? But that's quite evident in the research. And lastly, we know that this is also a very key learning experience for families. So families report that there's more bonding amongst them. It can be a particularly critical experience for children who learn things like sharing, belonging, identity. But also you might be surprised that in a family, siblings are often the ones who take the lead to recognize and accept cultural difference, often quicker than the parents. It can create a learning environment for the host family in terms of dealing with difference in general, helps them shift perspective, brings international awareness, and all of those things don't just stay within the family, but they can share them in their workplaces and volunteering experiences, etc., etc. So a hugely transformative experience, or it can be for all involved. Right, so what are the challenges? Let's see if you got it right. So the first challenge that we identified was that the families are not just one person, right? They're made out of different people, of different ages, different genders. And really to be effective with intercultural learning, we would need to have to cater to the different necessities that this ages and these groups have. So that's a big challenge. Of course, the other challenge is that families themselves are diverse, right? There's not one size fits all. Families around the world are different, roles are different, even within our own country. That can be really different. It's different if a single mom is hosting a student than a family of 10 is hosting a student, right? And that creates, again, a challenge for us, because how do we cater for them? The other aspect that is challenging, and this came through in your responses, is that maybe they might not be interested. But one of the things that happens is that there are different expectations. So the student comes in to make the most of their time normally, and the family wants to create this bond. And that requires time and effort, right? So they're kind of opposed. So different expectations between the student and the family, but also different expectations between families themselves. Like you were saying, are they doing it for status? Are they doing it for money? Are they doing it because they want to build this really strong bond? And how do you cater for all of those? Okay. For those of you who are very big on theory, you will also know that both student and family tend to be in the ethnocentric stages of the DMIAs. And what this means is that they don't often see that the other culture is as complex as their own, or they might not see that their culture is as important as their own. And that is often what is read as, well, they don't see the importance of intercultural learning in the experience. What might also happen is that in later stages of the DMIS, there might be a minimization. So they don't really pay attention to the difference. They see the difference as something that, yeah, it's out there, but really deep down, we're all the same. And that makes it very hard to engage people in intercultural discussion if they don't even see culture as being an important factor of the experience. What we also know is that immediately when you put a student into a family, there's a power imbalance. So there's a kind of like son-daughter versus parent relationship. And what the intercultural literature says is that intercultural learning happens best amongst equals. So that's a real challenge for us to try to break that dynamic. It means that students might not bring up issues, for example. Lastly, we also have this thing that the literature calls the trap of love. So because we're trying to build this strong bond, right, we go through kind of a phase of trying to fall in love with each other, right? And that means that, well, we're not really likely to bring up cultural difference because we think that it will interfere in that bond. We're also, both students and families, very unlikely to bring up conflict, right? So if the conflict is about something that the family doesn't feel that is a very big issue, they tend to just sweep it down. Okay, well, we can just put up with that. And the student will go home and nobody's the wiser. And the same with the student. They might not be liking something, but they won't bring it up. If there's a really huge case of kind of conflict and not liking each other, surprisingly, the conflict is also not addressed, right? As the cases when the family calls us and says, you have to move the student straight away, or the family says, or the student says, I don't want to deal with this family, they're rude. But the thing is, when the conflict is not addressed, we're missing an opportunity for learning and for developing our intercultural expertise. And then, of course, you had this challenge, all of you talked about it. So it's the limited resources. Yes, limited resources in terms of an organization having to spend quite a bit of money on this, maybe the time of the staff, but also limited resources on the side of the family on wanting to spend the time and energy to develop their competence. Right, so what can we do? What do we need in our programs to make intercultural competence happen for our families? So the first thing is that we need programs that are goal-based, okay? We need to know what are the knowledge, skills, understandings that we want families to have in order for this experience to be one of cultural learning. It needs to be developmental, so one thing needs to build into the other. Your arrival orientation needs to be the beginning stages of something that is built throughout the program, say, that you revisit later on. It needs to be holistic, so in every single aspect of what we do, we need to be aware or signaling that this is a learning opportunity for our host families. You'll be interested to know, for example, that they've done research and most of the expectation that a host family has in hosting comes initially from your PR material and your website. So are you telling your families that this is going to be a learning opportunity for them? And how is that shaping what they do or say? It's also experiential. So it's not just enough to put a student in a family and hope for the best. Of course, we know this, but you need to have times when they reflect and debrief their experience so they make sense of that learning. And that needs to be done, of course, by skilled facilitators. And it needs to be done, and this is key, before, during, and after. So this is both challenging and an opportunity. How are you going to engage the families before the student arrives? And how are you going to continue to engage them after they go? Finally, a last key message for you. Think about the role that families have, which is huge, right? You need them to be very skilled facilitators so that your students can move along and progress from an ethnocentric stage to a more ethno-relative. But they're also learners. They're also part of this program. They're also developing their own intercultural competence. So here's the challenge. I hope that you've enjoyed that, but are there any questions that I could address? There's a few that have come in. So one of them says, are all host families from AFS receiving this type of preparation? Good question. So yes, we have the journey, and Marcela will talk a bit more about that. We're still in the processes of implementation, so there's different partners that are at different stages, but our goal is that everybody will get this sort of preparation. Then somebody says, what tips can you give us to motivate families to engage with intercultural learning? Very good question. And I think this will apply for families or for anybody in general, as that curiosity is one of the best things that you can do to try and engage people who might say to you, oh, culture doesn't really matter to me. So just we do little exercises, for example, bring in objects from our different participants, or even people within organizations, and say, oh, isn't that an interesting object? What does that tell us about that person's culture? So anything that you can do to increase curiosity will be really key. And I think some of the exercises that Marcela will do will be also very useful to you. And then one last one I'm going to take. It says, in terms of the second to last point, what will interventions during and after look like? Debriefing, meeting, progress. Okay, I'm going to hand that one over to Marcela, because she will show you exactly how you do it. Thank you so much, everybody. And I hope you continue to enjoy our webinar. I hand over to my colleague.
Thank you, Carla. So I see that there is a few questions from you about what does this look like? How does AFS make it happen? Some as a host parent, how do I engage in this process? So let's see if with this second part, we can answer some of those, but we will still have time at the end of it for you to ask more questions if there is any. So the question is, so how does AFS support intercultural learning of host families? And then, as Carla said before, this webinar is all about supporting the learning, right? The intercultural competence development beyond, any other pastoral care or, logistic support that we do also offer to host families. So some of you in your questions ask, are you developing something for the families like you have for the students? And the answer is yes. So based on all this research that we share and the recommendations and the bit of work that we've done ourselves, so we did, of course, first develop a student learning journey curriculum for our students, but then it was very clear for us that that was only going to work if we had a companion journey for the host families. And you can see here the cover of those two. Sorry, just before I move on, I would say the first step in developing this curriculum was to set some goals. So as Carla said, one of the key recommendations is that it needs to be goal-based. So what do you want them to learn? So we developed this, what we call AFS Host Family Learning Objectives, which is divided in 4 key areas, starting with self-awareness, continuing with communication skills and empathy, intercultural competence, and of course, an area of global concern. So we do want our students to become global citizens, but we also want host families to engage in that process. So we want to expand the impact that we have through international education. So in terms of self-awareness, we want the family, every individual in the family, to really know more about themselves as cultural beings, how that influence their behaviors and attitudes, and also to be able to appreciate the change that the family will go through when hosting an exchange student. It's not going to be change-free. Things are going to move. Things are going to happen. And we want them to appreciate that and accept that process. And then we also, in terms of communication skills, we want them to be active listeners, to be aware to recognize nonverbal communications different to those of their own culture and their own background, and also be mindful of other people's interests, perspectives in everyday situation, which leads obviously to a deeper concern and sensitivity for others and their ability to expand their perception and realities of others. And then, of course, when it comes to intercultural competence, again, it's about appreciating diversity. So diversity, yeah, it's not easy. Being intercultural is not pain-free. Sometimes you need to go through some ups and downs. So we want people to appreciate that and engage in that process and be able to overcome these ethnocentric views, like Carla said, which are most of the time full of stereotypes. And then get some strategies, develop some strategies to go through the cultural differences and understand that, yeah, you can have that bond, you can have the strong relationship, and that will be even stronger if you embrace those cultural differences. So we know that similarities make us fall in love, so that will be the base for this. But hey, if we embrace that we are different, that we can really appreciate each other's differences, that bond is going to be stronger and more lasting than if we don't. And then finally, when it comes to global concern, we want them to be interested in what's happening around the world. We want them to be aware of what they do, the impact they do have in other people, in their own community, in other places of the world. And we want them to take action, same way as we ask our students. So take action in your community. How can we contribute to create a better world through these intercultural programs that we provide? So this is the goals of our programs, very strong, that we set at the beginning of this. And then what we did is, okay, how do we make this happen now? One is how you want to achieve it, what you want to achieve. The other thing is, well, how do we get there, right? So, yeah, so we do have the host family intercultural learning journey that I just described. And then, so what are the main features? And as Carla said, this is a journey that addresses most of the recommendations, actually all of the recommendations that Carla shared. It is goal-based, it's developmental, so we have interventions before, during, and after. It's very holistic because it's not just orientations or group gatherings, but we have a combination of interventions that I'm gonna share a bit more about. We also have a program within AFS to develop our facilitators. So AFS volunteers around the world facilitate these experiences, and they go through what we call the Intercultural Link Learning Program, which is a program to develop their intercultural competence and their ability to facilitate intercultural learning in others. So that's the third companion of all our approach. So that's very important. Also, another thing that is important here, as Carla said, was, well, families are diverse. They're not just one person. So at the beginning, we decided to focus on the two most influencers in the experience, which are the host parents and the siblings closer in age. So those two groups tend to be the ones that influence the students' experience the most. And that's how our journey is focused on those two groups. So what's in it? We have 4 types of interventions. One is group orientations that Carla mentioned before. So it's basically families coming together and on a regular basis to discuss their experience. And we know families are limited in time, so these orientations don't go for 2 days, right? They go for a few hours, and so families can make it happen. And then another thing we have is what we call the monthly learning reflections, which is a one-on-one between the AFS facilitator and the host family. And it happens on a monthly basis. And then we also have regular communications in the form of newsletters, emails, etc., where we also address the learning experience. And finally, what we have is what we call share activities for students and host families. So you remember one of the things Carla mentioned was that, well, it doesn't matter if you're in a host family or not. What does matter is the quality of that relationship. So we created a set of activities to really encourage the student and the family to have those conversations, to really engage in and be interested in each other's perspectives and experiences as they move through the experience. So I'm going to share with you some examples of what we do. So, and I know most of you might be familiar with the DIVE model. So I'm going to share 3 types of activities. The one that we use usually in orientation, so in the group orientation, one that we usually do one-on-one with the family, and then one of those shared activities that I mentioned about encouraging students and host families to work with each other. And it's going to be around values and behaviors. So let's have a look at the DIVE model. If you don't know, the DIVE model is based on Janet and Milton Bennett's DIE model, which stands for Description, Interpretation, and Evaluation. And I don't want to give too much out because we're going to try it out. But it's a very useful tool for everyone involved in the experience to learn how to suspend judgment. And when I say everyone, I mean this is something that we help students learn, we help our host families learn, we help our volunteers and staff who are our facilitators to learn. So it's a shared tool that we all have in our toolbox, right? So we can all speak the same language and work together in this process. But so we are gonna try the DIVE model now, and Sarah is gonna open the chat for all of you to have the chance to comment on this. And if you see my mouse moving a lot, it's because I'm gonna check. Yeah, so the chat is open. Sarah says that so you should be able to write on the chat box. Perfect. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna show you a photo. Yeah, let's try it. Yeah, that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna show you a photo, and I want you have the photo now, and I want you to tell me, what can you tell me about this photo? Just write it in the chat box. What's the first thing that comes to your head when you see this photo? And I'm gonna give you time to just have a look and just share. What can you tell me? I'm gonna open the chat box so I can read your comments. Yeah, people waiting for something or someone. People seem to be waiting, others seem to be filming. They say many people waiting for the bus. A community coming together in an emotional moment. Wow. It looks like a train station, open air. People attending an event or watching. Oh, there's a somber atmosphere. People are looking around, people are talking, taking photos, young people, older people. People looking at the same thing, taking a photo. People at different ages look bored. They're not interacting. Fantastic, I think we have enough. That's fantastic. So thank you so much for your comments. I'm gonna use them at a show. I'm gonna use them in a moment. I'm gonna say anything and then I'm gonna walk you through the DIVE model first, and then we'll get to the answer. Yes, someone is saying yes. Okay, I don't know if yes is let's tell us or wait, but we'll see. So the DIVE model has 4 steps. The first one is we need to describe. So what is it you see? What are the facts? The facts that everyone else can see. There's no doubt about facts. The second step is the interpretation. To interpret, so what do I think I see? How do I make sense of what I see? What are you assuming based on this picture? So, and this is interesting because for description, some of you said there's people, young people, old people. You said many people. So all of those who said people, young people, old people, someone said, let me see if I can find the other one. So those are observations, they're facts. People standing, yes, that's a fact. It's something no one can disagree with that. People of different ages, yeah, no one can disagree with that. But then we have a few interpretations here. So you're saying, well, they're watching something. You're saying they seem to be at a show. Some of you said they seem to be at a train station. They're coming together in an emotional moment. They're waiting for the bus. They're waiting for something to happen. They're filming. So all those are interpretations. This is us trying to make sense of this picture, going, oh, what are they doing? Are they waiting? Are they watching? Are they filming? Are they taking pictures? Are they just holding a camera? So, but then when we need to we move to the next step, and that's what you were trying to go, right? You wanted to know, so what is the answer? Is any of these interpretations correct? Is what I think I see correct? And that's when we need a cultural informer. We need to ask someone who knows about this situation to tell us about it, right? To check our assumptions. And in this case, it will be me because I know where the picture comes from, right? But you need to wait a little bit more for that. And then the final step in this process is, what do I feel about what I think I see? So, and this is usually positive or negative. There is a bit of a judgment there in the evaluation, right? And some of you might say, oh my God, this is creepy, this is gloomy. Oh, I'm trying to find some of the answers that you say. You said they look bored, that's an interpretation, but if you say, oh, this is boring, so if you feel this is boring, that will be an evaluation. So usually what happens is that in any intercultural interaction, we usually start with either the evaluation or the interpretation. When we are confronted with something that is unfamiliar and uncomfortable, we react. So we say, oh my God, that's awkward. Oh, that's weird what people do. Funny enough, just my auntie just sent me a message. She was traveling in a different country with different traditions, and they asked her to wear some of the local clothes, and she said, oh my God, they asked us to dress up. That was ridiculous. So that was her reaction to something that was different. That was an evaluation of the situation, right? So the dive, what we need when we teach people the dive is a way to help them suspend the evaluation, suspend the judgment temporarily, take a step back. Let's go to describe. Let's discuss what exactly you can see first. And then think, what can this mean, right? And this helps people expand their horizon, expand their thinking. So my first reaction is I thought they're waiting at a train station. But if I keep thinking and pushing myself to think of options, oh, maybe there is an emotional moment. Maybe it's a sad moment, but maybe it's a happy moment. So we keep thinking of options and then being able to think things from different perspectives. So by the time we go through the verification, so our relationship with that situation changes. And we tend to then hold the stereotypes, and we tend to hold the judgment because we are more informed about what the situation is. And also we did have a cultural learning in the process. So you want to know what this picture is, right? And I guess you closed the chat already. Okay, so I'm gonna go back. So now that you have the picture, so this picture actually happens in Estonia. And this is the first time that the Formula One comes to Estonia, if we are not wrong. This photo was taken by one of our trainers. And so it was a very happy moment. And it's interesting how some of you thought they were bored, or it was a bit, it wasn't a happy moment or emotional moment. They're very happy. This is a great opportunity. They're all watching the Formula One, and they just got into this building because apparently they had a better view. And so it was a family event, as you said. There were people from many different ages there. So, good. Unless you have any questions, we can wait. Okay. We'll move on. So that's the dive. And this we use at pre-arrival or pre-departure orientations with both students and families, so they can have that tool as they go through the experience. And the second activity is one that we do with facilitators and family. And actually we use the dive as a tool to debrief this activity. And basically we ask our student and host family, basically draw a map of your house. And we know that houses are something very visible in culture. When we think about the iceberg, it's model of culture is something that is at the top, right? Everyone can see houses. But then there's a lot of values behind how those houses are built. So we get them to share the map and discuss, where's the entrance door? What's the first room that people see when they walk into a house? Where do people meet? Where do they eat? Do they eat in front of the TV, in the living room, in the dining room? Do people eat in their bedrooms? Etc., etc. So, and then have a conversation. What does it tell you about our values, right? And as you can see, it's not just the student being told by the family how things work here, but it's host family and student learning from each other in the process. Okay, someone has a question that I'm gonna address later about the dive model. Okay, so this is the second activity, and then finally, I'm gonna share one more activity. Again, we are gonna try it together. Share activity comes in the format of a handout for families, and again is to push them to engage in quality interactions and be both learners in this situation. And it's a few questions for them. So we are going to put the same question, the first question for you up. You're going to get a poll like we did at the beginning of the webinar. And I'm going to ask you to answer these questions. So what is it most likely to mean if a person does not finish their plate of food at a meal? Is it that they don't like the food? That they're politely showing that they don't want more food, that they're full? That they don't care about wasting food? That they're impolite? Or that we don't have plates, we just share dishes? Wow, so almost 60% of you think that they're politely showing that they don't want more. 33% think they don't like the food. And 13% think they don't care about wasting food. So none of you think it's impolite. And none of you apparently think they're sharing dishes. So interesting. So you see how you have three very distinctive answers in this group here. So, yeah, oh, sorry. So we have the next one. So what we do is we give this, we get everyone in the family to answer this individually. We are not there, they do it themselves. And then they explain to each other their answers, right? And of course, in a family, it might happen something similar to what just happened here. People have different answers. So then we encourage them to discuss, how would you indicate in a family setting that you like or don't like the food? How do you indicate that you want or don't want more food? How do you consider it's wasting food? How much food should you eat? What kind of behavior at the table is impolite? So again, you see, it's about learning from each other. And so let's do another one. And we have the question here, but Sarah is going to put it on the screen. So what do you think if a teenager is sitting in the parents' bedroom when the parents are not there? So a teenager in the parents' bedroom when the parents are not there. So what's your reaction? They should not be there. They're just watching TV. Nothing special. This is very uncommon. Wow, this is even more divided. So we have 40% of you don't think anything special. 31% think this is very uncommon. 17% they're just watching TV, or 14% they should not be there. So interesting. So again, we ask them to work with this with the family, and then different questions here would be, is the parents' bedroom a place that every family member can use? Are children not allowed to go there? Are there family activities that only take place in the parents' room, like watching TV, for example? Maybe there's the only TV in the house. What other rooms might be public or private? So there you have it. I think these are three activities that we do at different stages of our journey for the host families. This, I didn't say at the beginning, but this is something we launched last year in 2016 after a couple of years researching and working on this project. So I'm all ears for your questions that either me or Carla can answer. So again, you can use the Q&A box to add your questions. I think one of the early ones was, how do we motivate families to come, right? And I think something that's very important is you can put it together with other activities, right? And think about what works in your cultural context. You know, I know that in some countries, inviting people to a meal, like some sort of celebration, then add this on would work. We know that some other families might be more than happy to do this via webinar like we are doing today. But there's always something that can go together with this to excite families to come along, either a meal, a celebration, a ceremony of some sort, or any other activity that will work in your context. So someone is asking me here, what's the difference between verify and evaluate? So verify is when you go and check with others, right? So you think that these people there are going through a very emotional moment, right? But you're not sure it's an emotional moment or it's something else. So you go and talk to your host family. So I saw this, and I think this is what happened. Is that correct? So is that like checking? Verifying is like checking, making sure that you're not getting it wrong, that what you're thinking, you're seeing is correct. And then evaluation is how do you feel about it? You know, is it something that you really don't like, or is it something you like? For any situation, there's always a positive and a negative possible reaction attached to it. Okay, let's see, there's some more questions coming. Well, someone is asking where can you find a complete guide for the values and behavior activity. The host family journey is not an open document. It's a document. It's an AFS document that we use with our students. For the case of this webinar, we will share that activity with you as a follow-up. Someone is asking about the siblings. I did say this is focused on teenager siblings and parents. So this is an activity that can be done with siblings as well. Someone is asking if this activity is together, family and student. Exactly. So the shared activity, the last one, the last two ones that I share with you, they're both to be done together with family and students, right? So a host parent says the question activity can be fun to do with the students. Yeah, we can share we will share those questions with you. It will definitely be fun to do with the students. Someone is asking how many meetings do you recommend that you have with the host families during the year? So once the student arrives, the question is, of course, about students who stay for a year. While in AFS, we do have 4, but it will depend on the type of organization you work for. Our recommendation is to have 4, and it's linked to how this is developmental, and it's linked to the different stages people go through in intercultural experience. Someone is saying, are we seeing any changes so far? So this has been in the we have started implementing in August 2016, but mainly at the beginning of this year. And we're already seeing that the satisfaction levels from the host families are increasing, that when students, families, and volunteers, they are speaking the same language and sharing the same tools, the learning really improves. But we haven't run a full-on study yet because it hasn't been a complete year of implementing. So this is the data we are collecting through the process as we implement. Any more questions or comments? Carla, do you want to add anything, or is there anything that you can see in the questions that you would like to address?
Sure. There was a question about whether this the research that we presented was only about non-paid families versus paid host families. So we tried to look really broad. It was all that we could find because AFS has conducted its own research on families, and our own families, our non-paid families, we have a little bit more on that. But I think the general findings about it being an emotional experience and about it needing for intercultural learning to be, developmental, holistic, et cetera, apply. Of course, you'll be dealing with different expectations. And I think the other thing to say is that the homestay environment is changing a lot. I think it's gone, at least in New Zealand, from a place where most of the research was based on our AFS information as well, but we looked broadly, so it included both paid and unpaid, probably more about unpaid, which was what was available. What it was saying as well is that obviously things like the way that the intercultural learning program needs to be established works for both of them. And things like the fact that there's a pressure in it being an emotional experience, and talking about it in an anecdotal way also applies to both of them. What would be, of course, significantly different is that the expectations between the two groups can be seen as quite different, right? And that we're seeing a lot of changes in the homestay environment, where we used to, at least in New Zealand, have a lot more homestays available. So when conflict was encountered, it was fairly easy to change the student to a different homestay. But we know that we are under a lot of pressure. We're a small country. And so I think organizations are starting to find that we need to level those expectations between families and students. We need to prepare homestays for what the experience is like, and that I hope embracing conflict as a learning environment will be something that will help us from now on. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
And I think we have one last one that I just see coming, and then we'll wrap up. Do you have exercises when there are situations where language difficulties between the student and host family? Actually, if you think about it, even just doing the map in their homes, even if they don't understand each other's languages, they're drawing, they're seeing, they have a visual there that can help them. Students can use the translator, that's very common. They use an online translator to show. Same with the questions. So sometimes because of the language barrier, we just don't even engage in that conversation. But having this more structured approach, even if it's not going to go very deep, because the conversation cannot go very deep in the first few weeks, it opens the door for the conversation, right? And I'm going to hand it over to Sarah. Thank you very much for your questions.
Great, thank you,
Thanks so much,
Marcela. Thank
everyone.
you, Carla. So thank you. We are 2 minutes away from finishing the webinar. And there we go. So there's some online resources that you might be interested in. We will, like Marcela said, we will send this to you after. You'll get this tomorrow, the PDF, so you can access these resources. But we have basically 3 online resources. We have a blog, we have a news magazine, and some short little 3 to 5 pagers, a series on intercultural learning for AFS and Friends. So some of these topics we touched upon, for example, the DIVE model, that is easily accessible in our ICL or Insights for AFS and Friends series. So if you'd like to read more about that, you can access that online. And if you have any questions about anything that we mentioned here, feel free to reach out to your local AFS organization. I know one of the questions said, I'm a host parent in the US, where can I go? Well, reach out to us and we can put you in touch with the right people. And also, if you'd like to join any of the trainings that AFS is doing around the world too, we do a lot of trainings on intercultural topics. So please use us. We're here. We would love to have you and to work with you. And finally, we have 2 more webinars in our series this week. One is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, called Global Skills Development for the Workforce, Interventions for Mobility Programs. And that is with Dr. Mick Vandenberg and Bert Vertkamer from AFS Intercultural Programs. And then tomorrow at 2 p.m., we have Assessing Intercultural Competence with Dr. Darla Deerdorf. So we do hope you can join us if you can. It would be great to see you. And finally, we would like you to save the date for our AFS Global Conference, which is happening next year in Budapest, Hungary, September 26th to 28th. So you'll get more information about that at the beginning of the year next year. So we want to thank you all for joining. We hope this was informative. We will be following up with a survey, in which we're actually going to put in the chat box right now. One moment while we find that. And like I said, if you have any questions about any of these resources or any activities, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and we would be happy to put you in contact with some of the right people or offer suggestions. And here is the survey. So please, we would love for you to fill out the survey and get some feedback from you. So again, we want to thank you, Marcela. Thank you so much, Carla, for leading us through this really interesting topic. And we hope you all have a wonderful morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Have a great day.